Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Joining me now is Allum Bokhari, senior tech writer at Breitbart News. He's also author of the new book, Deleted, Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. It's available for pre-order at all your favorite merchants. So, Allum, tell me how Big Tech is trying to erase the Trump movement.
Well, it's doing this in two important ways. And one of the ways is what we've seen, what many of your listeners will be familiar with, the bans and the deplatforming of many prominent Trump supporters, many grassroots Trump supporters over the past 4 years. But the more insidious thing they're doing is what you can't see, which is the changes they've made to their algorithms that determine what you see on your front page when you log into these platforms, or what you see at the top of your Google search results. They've made lots of changes to those over the past 4 years. And what my sources inside these companies have been telling me, it's quite terrifying what an algorithm can do. If you tell a computer algorithm that, ordinary conservative speech is hate speech and needs to be suppressed, what that can do is then suppress an entire movement at the same time, simultaneously. Because if an algorithm is scanning every post that everyone makes before it goes out and determining whether it will go, at the top of trending topics or at the top of your news feed or at the very, very bottom where no one will see it, then that's a formula for censoring entire movements at the same time, just based on how they talk and the references they use and the things they post.
So some people will allegedly violate a company's standards, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it may be, which incidentally differ greatly from the First Amendment, and then they're just disappeared. Maybe one of the most extreme examples is Laura Loomer. But what remedy is there for when you just get deleted by one of these platforms?
Well, there isn't a remedy, and it's always been very bizarre to me that if you own a physical business in the real world, your landlord can't evict you for any reason or no reason. They'll have to follow a strict legal due process. You can even take them to court if you think they've evicted you for the wrong reasons. But if you own, if your business is dependent on one of these platforms, Facebook or YouTube, which many people's businesses, that is the case for many people these days, that their livelihood is tied to these online platforms, you have no recourse. And the reason you have no recourse is because Congress passed a law in the 1990s, essentially giving tech platforms wide leeway to remove anything they like for almost any reason. And tech platforms have used that law to argue in court that they can ban you for whatever reason they like, no matter what the impact is on your livelihood. And I think that's a point that goes even beyond politics, just to a simple question of business fairness and consumer protection. Because so much of our livelihood, so much of our business, so much of our day-to-day lives is now dependent on these platforms that can censor us, remove us, erase us from the internet for any reason they like.
I used to be one of those hands-off, let the market figure it out kinds of people. And that's still where largely I am when it comes to many other issues. But if you look at Facebook, Twitter, Google, and how they essentially operate like a totalitarian government, it just seems to me like something needs to be done about that. And regardless of what you think about these people that get wiped out, it's Alex Jones or it's Laura Loomer or all these, various other people, regardless of what you think about that, it seems to be like there's a very coordinated campaign going on between these companies. And it's like somebody that can get deplatformed by multiple companies within a matter of hours, as if it's some sort of a campaign. What is your take on that?
So this just shows me how power is shifting from the government to these unaccountable corporations. Because, the left knows they can't just go to the government and ask to censor someone. There's a First Amendment that stops the government from doing that. They can do that in Europe, and that is what they do in Europe. But in the US, it's different. They have to instead outsource censorship to these tech platforms. And we really have to ask ourselves, do we want free speech in reality, or do we want free speech just on paper? Because with so much communication now being controlled by these tech platforms, we won't really have a First Amendment in practice if we allow these companies to keep getting away with it. And I'll point out that they don't need to censor anyone. This is a choice that they're making. I've often made a point that if these tech platforms wanted to, all the content filters they've developed for, so-called hate speech, so-called fake news, whatever you can think of, they could simply be made opt-in filter buttons that users could choose to switch on or off. Google has had an option called Safe Search. They've had it for many, many years, almost since they were created, that users can choose to turn on if they want to filter out obscene results. There's no reason why every other tech platform can't utilize similar technology. The reason they're not doing it is because they want that power to control the discourse. And really, political elites want them to have that power as well. They're very, very threatened by a genuinely free and open internet. Because in that short window when there was a free and open internet, say the early 2010s and the late 2000s, that was when all these populist movements emerged and proliferated. It created an environment where the elites couldn't predict where the next radical movement and when the next radical movement was going to emerge and threaten their power. That's why they had to kill internet freedom. And that's really what they've done over the past 4 or 5 years. All this amazing technology that allowed people to access the global audience immediately just by having a laptop or a smartphone connected to the internet. That's been taken away from everyone. And that's something I think should make every internet user, whether they're American or not, really, really angry, because this was a huge step forward for free speech, for the democratization of information, and elites have just completely taken that away from the people.
So when you say elites, do you mean the companies, the government, they're colluding together? What do you mean by that?
They're definitely colluding together. If you look at congressional hearings, you'll often see Democrat politicians pressuring these companies, why haven't you censored this person or that person? That's what they did with Alex Jones. You also see journalists, mainstream media organizations using their power to generate bad press about these companies as means to pressure them into censoring their competitors on the internet. You also see left-wing activists trying to whip up advertising boycotts against platforms like Facebook and YouTube when they don't censor enough. So even if these tech platforms didn't want to censor, which I believe they do want to censor, you'd have left-wing advocacy organizations using their power to pressure them to do so. That's why, in a sense, regulating these companies to say, well, look, you can't just censor First Amendment protected speech. You have to give users the option to filter what they want instead. That would actually, in a sense, help the tech companies, because then they could, there'd be no incentive for these left-wing advocacy organizations and these journalists and these politicians to constantly try and damage the tech companies, to force them into more and more censorship, because there'd be a law preventing the censorship. So it would really be helpful, not just for consumers, but for the tech companies themselves.
So what is the solution? What is it from the Congress? Is it from the executive branch? What's the solution?
Well, you really need multiple solutions to solve different problems. So to solve the problem of Google's search engine bias, that's something you really need, antitrust investigators to get involved with that. And that is what we're seeing. The Justice Department is looking at an antitrust investigation of Google. With the social media censorship, what I think you need to do two things. First, you need to give people the ability to sue these companies if their accounts have been wrongfully terminated, especially if it's impacted their livelihood. And the second thing you need to do is create an industry-wide standard where any filter on First Amendment protected speech that these companies want to implement is simply going to be an opt-in filter that users can decide whether to enable or disable, instead of having this top-down system where these companies decide what we can see and what we can't see. You've got to give it over to users and maximize user choice. I think that has to be the standard.
Allum Bokhari, senior tech writer at Breitbart News and author of Deleted, Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election, is available September 22nd, but available for pre-order now wherever you buy your books. Allum, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Kyle.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back.